Happy Friday to you, and welcome to another edition of Pipes, Pavement, and Policing, the 3 Ps of municipal politics. We talk about a lot more than that here, but those are, of course, essential, critical services that a lot of people don't think about until they think about them. That is, until they start to wear down and fall apart, or in the case of policing, it's not absent, we don't feel as safe, then we start to talk about it. Pavement, road is nice, don't even think about it. It starts to fall apart, you think, what's going on with these roads, right? Well, today we got to talk about something that happened on Wednesday, a report about our water system, our potable water, our drinking water, the water that comes out of the taps. And as I've said, there's nothing more immediate than that. And when that starts to fail, again, we all take it for granted. We turn our taps on, water comes out. But when it starts to fail, oh my gosh, we start to feel like this is something we've got to now pay attention to. It is time to pay attention to it. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but as the presenter said on Wednesday, the best time to think about it was yesterday. The second best time is today. It's like the old, best time to plant a tree thing. It was yesterday. Second best time to plant a tree is today. And it makes me think of I have a Honda CR-V in my driveway that I purchased in 2018. Now, I made car payments on that for about 5 years. And in that time, I never had to think about the car. It was it's brand new, drove it off the showroom lot. Well, now it's 2026 and it starts to make noises here and there and doesn't drive as well sometimes. And I think, I start to think about it, right? I start to think about my car in a way that I never thought about it before. And then, of course, you got to think about financing, purchasing a new one, repairs, that kind of thing. Well, this is what's happening with our water system. Back, friends, in 1906, that's right, we had a shiny new water system in St. Stephen. That is when the first well was drilled, the first source of water for St. Stephen was discovered. It used to be the river, believe it or not. Obviously not ideal. Municipalities, even around that time, were definitely looking for an aquifer system to drill down into. And an aquifer was discovered after some water searching around Maxwell Crossing. So, for those of you who are paying attention, that's about 5 kilometers away. And the drill was put down into that area, into the aquifer, and that is the source of drinking water for St. Stephen. Now, that means, as we said, it needs to be piped in 5 kilometers from there across the municipality. So there needs to be a pumping station, there needs to be a treatment station, that kind of thing. And that is what serves our community. Well, 120 years later, friends, there have been some things along the way, and I won't get into too much of the history, although there will be a link in the comments here if you're watching on Facebook and YouTube where you can read the full report. But on Wednesday, Mr. Rory Pickard from Dillon Consulting delivered the news that we need to be thinking about upgrading our water system. As a resident like you, I'm sure that you have a sense that things are not ideal in our water. There are boil water orders sometimes when, we get notices that the well failed, something about the wall collapsed, or, there's contamination or something, a leak along the line. And again, it's a 5 kilometer cast iron pipe that is bringing our water from that original well into the municipality. So there are leaks along the way. And Rory Pickard kind of started there, saying, look, we know that there are vulnerabilities in the system. There is a well number 2 that was drilled in, I have the schematic here, 1978, and then a well number 3 that was drilled in 1999. Unfortunately, those are not significant enough, have not yielded enough water for a water supply. There's been other water exploration around to see what else might be around town. We feel like we live in the middle of all this water. There's lakes, there's rivers, but in terms of needing to drill into an aquifer, this is it so far. And that leads to certain vulnerabilities when this well is getting old, or when the line that brings that water in is starting to wear out. So a few things that are vulnerable. There's the well and the pump house are starting to age dramatically. Again, 1906. There's that transmission main, 400 millimeter wide cast iron pipe. And there is the Todd Hill Reservoir. So in the case where this water supply failed, the Todd Hill Reservoir would be kind of tied in and would give us a couple of days, apparently, at our current municipal water uses. And then aside from that, and there was a bit of like a worst case scenario conversation where Director of Public Works, Sean Morton, he in response to a question kind of at the table, he said, look, it's our absolute contingency plan, our kind of last resort measure would be to get water from the St. Croix River. Obviously, it would not be potable, it would not be drinkable, but we could make sure that water came out of the taps somehow. But of course, drinking water would need to be trucked in, etc. So that's kind of like the scenario that you don't want to have to consider, that we definitely don't want to have. But this is an example of the kind of decision making that your municipal government needs to be making. And you might think in 2026, like, why are we here? Well, we are always inheriting the decisions of the past as a municipality, right? This is really what separates municipal governments from, I would say, the rest in a lot of ways, is, as I said, the things that the municipal government funds and builds are so tangible. Water and roads and sidewalks. Every time you step outside, you are seeing the result of that, compared to, other levels of government, say, like immigration policy or tax policy or things like that. Those things are critical and important, but they don't your feet don't hit cracked pavement in the same way, or turn your water on and it's brown, right? So you get what I'm saying. So Roy Pickard really did elaborate on the state of our water situation. So for example, just going on, there are many leaks in the system that were found in the early 2000s. There was a leak assessment in the early 2000s. Leaks were sealed up to the best of their ability, the firm that was brought in to seal up the leaks, but nothing has been done in 25 years. And so because of that, there are potentially lots of leaks, which means lots of water loss along the system. And we're drilling up an aquifer and pumping water and paying money to do that. When water is leaking out, obviously it's not as efficient or cost effective as it can be. And so that is something that we need to address. At the very least, there needs to be some leak assessment, but of course that's kind of Band-Aid solution. We need to think about a more permanent solution, because well 1 and the pump house are vulnerable, and that 5K line are vulnerable. Wells number 2 and 3 are not really cutting it, and the Todd Hill Reservoir is aging rapidly, and there's concerns around that. So that means, in addition to that, there's a lack of sufficient data as well. This is kind of the last thing, and then we'll get to the good news and the plan. But essentially, the schematics for the water line and where things are and how they work, they're kind of in drawers. They're in like scans. There are some computer files here and there, but you're talking about 120 years of water systems that it's not harmonized. It's a lot of it is like wisdom passed down through engineers who have worked in this municipal district of St. Stephen's water supply, and there's something in a drawer here, and there's a few files there. So, Dillon Consulting, Mr. Pickard really did say, like, we need to make sure that the whole thing is mapped and digitized, and when there's a problem, we can zoom in on it. You want sensors, you want to know exactly where things are. And I got to say, even just as a resident, I have heard anecdotally among people talking about how just haphazard, like I say, based on some gentleman who worked in the water supply for 30 years and happens to know things, and if something breaks, even though he's retired a long time ago, you got to give him a call. Again, I'm not sure about the truth of that, but it was nice to hear kind of the consulting firm, after assessing, say, no, we need a schematic, we need the water system information brought up to standard for the 21st century. So that is what's needed to be done. All those things to be done. In fact, they have they laid out a plan here. So first, we need to confirm the boundaries of the Maxwell Crossing aquifer. We don't really know how big the aquifer is and whether or not it can continue to serve a municipality of this growing population size well. So figure out the boundaries. The second thing then is develop new wells to replace well number 1, work on well number 2 and 3, redevelop wells number 2 and 3 to make sure they do collect the water and get it moving into the system. Then we need to upgrade the treatment plant because there are new provincial standards around drinking water. And if we fall below those standards, then it's not going to be acceptable. The fifth thing is the Todd Hill Reservoir needs to be updated. And then they would like to twin the main. So I said that 5K main that's cast iron, that can continue to function fairly well, but they'd like to add a second line with more modern materials to move water through just in case the first one fails, okay? And then I suppose when that one does, we would twin the second line, but this is the kind of work that needs to be done, okay? So how do you do all this? 3 phases. It's a 15-year plan. This is also part of the package, but you can see here phase number 1 here, and instead of looking backwards in my phone, I'll see years 1 to 3 are the foundation and immediate risk mitigation. This is kind of where we are now. Then phase 2 would be years 4 to 10, infrastructure renewal and production expansion. You can see, for example, the twinning of the lines there, and updating the treatment plant, and then the data stuff here. So then phase 3, years 11 to 15, system optimization and sustainability, where you get things digitized, and everything is here. You can read this. I don't want to get too far into the weeds on that. But the funding strategy then, of course, was brought up. And of course, Mr. Pickard said, we are talking tens of millions of dollars. And I want you to remember that we are working with a $14.9 million, $14 million budget every single year. That's the annual income. So when you're talking about a project that's tens of millions right there, this is going to be multi-years of paying for this, figuring out how to pay for it. We'll put a pin in that and come back to it momentarily because there's not a lot of time left in this video. A couple of things were mentioned, like I said, out of questions from counselors. But essentially, one of the most interesting things was smaller communities like this, Mr. Pickard said, they don't tend to have a backup plan the way we are next to a river, thankfully. So apparently, Public Works has a plan in Fredericton waiting approval for a backup plan if our water completely failed. So it's like, that's nice, comforting, cold comfort. Good to know that water will come out of the pipes, even if we got a notice that, hey, it's not drinkable. We got to figure out how to do drinkable water. You got to think about the unthinkable, right? Plan for what you don't want to happen. So it's good to know that that's happening. Obviously, I think a lot of us would be comforted if water upgrading had happened earlier than this. But this is the next challenge for council and for us as residents. The other thing then is, of course, the Municipal District of St. Stephen is in the unique position of having a water source so far away, apparently. Dillon Consulting, Mr. Pickard said, that's unusual to have the aquifer so far away and have to pipe it in that many kilometers. So I think, again, because the river was cutting it for a while, it's like, hey, the water's right there. But then it wasn't good in the early 1900s. They had to go around looking for an aquifer. It's far away, and here we are. So this is why, friends, and I'm just going to leave this here, municipal politics and municipal budgets do need to be the most conservative level of government. And what I mean by that is municipal budgets always need to be running a surplus. So of course we can hold tax rates and say, we're not going to tax you more this year. That happened this year. There was a freeze on property taxes. But capital dollars that are required for something like this, or any upgrades, pavement, pipes, right? Capital dollars where you need to buy infrastructure, the things that you see that get us around and get us water and things like that. those, I'll just say it again, capital dollars are just surplus dollars from another time, right? So if we have the money today in the capital budget to spend on this, it's because past councils put the money there from their surpluses. At the end of the day, after operating, after all the annual costs, everything from, paying the service commission to buying pencils in the office, that's the operating budget, right? Salaries and things like that. Above that, there needs to be a surplus, and that gets put into a capital fund. So either we have the money for this from past years, or we're running surpluses now, and it's not enough, and we are reaching out into the future and taking on debt, anticipating surpluses then that will get us through our operating budget and saying, okay, we're just going to have faith that in the future we can, raise taxes, have the surplus we need to pay down the debt on the money we're going to borrow today to upgrade our water infrastructure. Okay, so I just want you to know, as mayor, I'm aware of that. That's how I think about things. You don't spend money pell-mell. You don't do Hail Mary guesses into the future. We need all this stuff to be evidence-based on math and accounting and say, here's what we need and here's where we're going. That's why having a 15-year plan like this is really helpful, because we will understand how to pay for it. We'll know how to make fiscal decisions. And there is a capital budget from past years, but that's just a general concept that you can kind of stick in your hat. And remember, this is why municipal governments always need to be running surpluses, because if you don't have it, you literally can't build this stuff. And we do see municipalities that are insolvent and can't pay for things. We never want to get there, all right? So that is the kind of leadership that you are going to be electing on May 11th, a council and a mayor that think these things through, know how these accounting measures work, and make a plan for building out what we need in the future. All right, friends, more can be said about this, as with everything, but that's it for today. BuildUpSt.Stephen.ca, that's my website. You can learn more about me, my commitments, my priorities, an action plan of how we'll do this. I'll talk more about this in the days to come. Cheers, have a great Friday, and we'll see you again tomorrow.